Deborah Penrose. Let's have roll call, please.
Okay, Director Penrose.
Here.
Director Dye. Director Dye, you're muted.
I hear her.
Okay, Director Lohman.
Here.
Director Radek.
Here.
Director Blanchard.
Here.
Chair Slater Carter.
Present. And I forgot to add that this is meeting of July 13th, 2020, and we are starting at 7:02. Public comment, oral communication. Do we have any? I don't see any members of the public.
Neither do I have any email, nothing.
Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. We will start with item, going to the paper copy, approved minutes of June 22nd, 2020, regular board meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Deborah. Do we have a second?
Wait a second.
Don't we
Thank
do
you,
both
Jim.
as part of the consent agenda together?
Oh, you know, you're right. I'm just off my regular. We also have approved disbursements for July 13, 2020. So do we have anything that needs to be removed? And let's start with a motion and a second.
So moved to approve.
Thank you, Deborah.
Second.
Thank you, Barbara. All those in favor, roll call vote, please.
Director Dye.
Yes.
Director Penrose.
Yes.
Director Lohman.
Yes.
Director Radek.
Yes.
Director Blanchard.
Yes.
Chair Slater Carter.
Yes.
Motion
And now,
passes. All in favor?
at 7:05, we are moving on to regular business. This is good news. Let's start with authorize the general manager to issue a purchase order for an amount not to exceed $34,619 to GSE Construction for installation of scum pipe and replace the corroded baffle supports.
So last year in the month of October, the board had approved for procuring the scum pipes, and staff went ahead and procured the scum pipes. The scum pipes are now available at the plant, and this staff report is now to authorize for installing these scum pipes. So we went ahead and contacted qualified contractors, got quotations from 3 contractors, and we found GSC Construction to be the most responsive contractor. And just to give you a heads up, the scum pipe is in the primary clarifier. When we were inspecting the primary clarifier, we realized that the skimming mechanism had corroded and therefore required replacement. This is the same pipe which removes all the fats, oils, and greases, and makes sure that that's sent to the digester and then further on for further processing before it's sent to the landfill. So we are required to comply with certain requirements, and therefore it's important that these fats, oils, and greases are properly skimmed. And this was not happening earlier. We had an old corroded tube which was not rotating properly, and therefore procured these pipes. And therefore, we would request the board to authorize the general manager to issue a purchase order in the amount of $34,619, not to exceed $34,619. The apparent lowest bidder, which is GSC Construction. Any questions, discussion, please?
I'd like to start by thanking you for sending out that report earlier. I really appreciate getting the report so I can see them separately as well as part of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hear no discussion. I don't see any hands up. Do we have a motion?
I have my hand waving here. I'm not sure.
Oh, oh,
I
I'm
also
sorry.
wanted to
I
thank
was
you
looking on the screen, Barbara, and yeah, okay.
it's the same thing. I wanted to thank Kishan for, it seems like this is a really important upgrade of the facility, something that really needed to be done. And I thought the staff report was really good in explaining. I mean, obviously, it's something important or they wouldn't be looking for it, but having the explanation of why it's so critical to the functioning of the plant was really helpful to me. So I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say, I think this is a good thing for us to be doing.
Good. Any more comments? If none, then let's have a motion. I see Deborah Penrose applauding. Barbara, would you like to
Make a motion to approve?
Thank you. Do we have a second, Rick?
Second.
Thank you, Deborah. Roll call vote, please.
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Dye,
Yes.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Radek,
Yes.
Director Blanchett,
Yes.
Chair Slater Carter.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion passes, yes. And now moving on to item B, amend the 2020 collections contract with the City of Half Moon Bay to extend the period of performance from July 1, 2020 through August 31, 2020, per section 8.2 of the current agreement.
So as you're aware, Sam had an agreement with the City of Half Moon Bay for the collections for the year 2019-2020. And thereafter, the collections budget was also approved by Sam and adopted in the month of June. And therefore, it requires that we renew the contract with the City of Half Moon Bay for the year 2020-2021. The city has requested for an extension of the old agreement itself for another 2 months until August 31st, so that the parties could have a little more time to finalize the amendment. Therefore, both the legal councils met, the City of Half Moon Bay Legal Council met with Jeremy, our legal counsel, and decided that the best way would be to get an amendment until get an extension of the existing agreement until August 31st, while we work out the proposed agreement for 2021. Therefore, this has been brought to the board to authorize the amendment.
Questions, discussion, motion?
Director Dye had her hands up.
I'm sorry, this is my screen again.
We passed a collective agreement in our board. And so, and it was my understanding at that time that the agreement was accepted for all three. I guess it doesn't matter, we can contract separately, but am I to understand that now there are issues with that Half Moon Bay has issues with the current collections contract?
No, just to clarify, this was just the prior year's contract ended on July 1st. We did not have a replacement in place yet, and there was going to be a need to still do some additional discussions. So this was just a way of extending the existing contract forward with enough time to make sure we had plenty of time to conclude negotiations. But negotiations are going fine. We have some things we still need to work out, but this is just to make sure that there was no gap in coverage. But there's really no issue. Now there is a larger issue. It's actually part of the strategic plan. I think there's going to be a report later on in the meeting. Is there a way to programmatically do multi-year agreements for collections? That's a different subject. But for purposes of the Half Moon Bay SAM collections contract, we're on track.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jeremy, I just want to let you know, Director Dye, that the board passed the budget for the collection, so the dollar amount doesn't change. It's only the scope of work in the agreement which is getting ironed out. So the dollar amount remains the same. That's been approved by SAM board in June and has been adopted also.
All right.
Okay.
This is fine. I'm willing to extend it. I would like to understand what's going on here better, and I don't. So if I could get some more information on this after this meeting, that would be fine. I have no objection to extending the date, but I thought we had all agreed on the collections contract. So I'm just confused. I'm not objecting. I'm just confused. So if I could get the information, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, we can do that for you, Director Dye. We can.
Jason, I have an idea. I think this should be an agenda item. The history of these collections contracts, it doesn't need to be long, but there has been a lot of changes in the collections contracts in the last 3 or 4 years. And so for the public record and for everyone who tends to be watching this, I think it would be useful because there are 2 parts to SAM, and it's important to know the distinction and the evolution and what we're doing. So I'd love to get it as a agenda item maybe in August.
Yes, Chair.
Can I say one more thing, which is the functioning of the collections contract? Even though they are individual agreements with SAM from the 3 entities, there's a certain synergy of us all working together. And so I'm just interested in knowing what the changes are. And so to see the changes or what the issues are. So I did not see that in the staff report. I do not understand.
Well, at this point, Director Dye, there are no changes, right? It's strictly just the date.
Oh,
From the prior year, it's just a date extension. Now, in August, there's going to be another, this is purely administrative, but in August, there's going to be a contract between the next year's contract between Half Moon Bay and SAM, and that will have substantive changes. So, but this is just purely an administrative extension.
okay. Well, just if we can understand what the issues are, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have a motion? Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Uh-oh. Roll call vote, please.
Director Penrose,
Yes.
Director Dye,
Yes.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Ruddock,
Yes.
Director Blanchard,
Yes.
Chair Slater Carter.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Moving right along to item C, authorize the general manager to share costs of repair to the access road at Montero Pump Station with Montero Water and Sanitary District in an amount not to exceed $100,000.
As you're aware, Montero Pump Station is owned by SAM and is located at Montero, just behind the Montero Water and Sanitary District's office. There is a common access road which is used by both the districts, by both Montero Water Sanitary District as well as SAM. And that road has heavily eroded and deteriorated over many years. And therefore, when Montero Water and Sanitary District carried out road repair work through a contractor in the adjoining areas, we decided that we should utilize the same contractor and carry out the common access road also repaired. And therefore, we decided that Montero and SAM decided that the same contractor will go ahead and pave it. The 1/3 portion of the road has already been constructed, has already been paved, and the remaining 2/3 is yet to be done. And therefore, this was included as a capital improvement plan project and was adopted by SAM board in the month of June. And therefore, this has been brought back to the board again for approval of this contract so that we could share the cost with Montana Water and Sanitary District to a cost not to exceed $100,000. And the details are in the packet, the map is in the packet, and the proposal from the contractor is also in the packet. If there are any questions, I'm here to answer, please.
Seems like a good idea to me, sharing the costs,
Thank you, Barbara.
moving approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jim. Roll call vote, please.
Director Penrose,
Aye.
Director Dye,
Aye.
Director Lohman,
Yes.
Director Ruddock,
Yes.
Director Blanchard,
Yes.
Chair Slater Carter.
Yes. I will note that it is 7:19 and we have made it through most of the agenda. This is awesome, guys. So we are now at the General Manager's Report. Item A, receive report from Wastewater Management Specialists on the status of work for Organizational Management Improvement Program.
Yes, on the general manager's report, we have two presentations. One on 5A from Dan Child from Wastewater Management Specialist. And there was a request from one of the directors to give more details on the odor and corrosion control, and therefore Dan has been requested to make the presentation. And following that will be the next presentation from Ameresco on the status development. So I will request Dan to go ahead and make the presentation. I can share the screen with you, Dan. Dan, would you be doing it from there?
Either way, whatever works best.
Yep, I've given you permission to do that. You can do that because then that way you'll be able to navigate each slide the way you want it. Okay. You may share your screen now.
Sounds like there's a blower on.
What if I got it? There it is. You see it?
Good.
Okay, overall, things are going really well. I was asked to talk about the odor control. And there's quite a few slides here, but I think we'll be able to go through them pretty fast. I wanted to give you just a quick update that of what odor is, what we're dealing with, and what we're looking for. As you may recall, one of the projects in the capital budget this year is to improve the odor control and subsequently at the treatment plant. So we're hoping, yeah, that noise, I don't know what that is, but it's good. We're hoping that by taking care of the treatment plant or of the IPS and the pump station systems, odors and corrosion. And when I talk odor, odor is a big part of the issue because we don't want to, cause problems for our citizens and having to smell things, but corrosion is hand in hand with odor in the system that we have. And corrosion is really a big deal for SAM because as we've seen, and matter of fact, let's go through some of these photos now. We've talked about the corrosion at the treatment plant in the past, and it continues not only at the treatment plant, but out in the collection system. So there's several things that cause odor in a treatment plant. One is what is referred to as a long detention time. Basically, that's the amount of time it takes for water to leave a house and get to the treatment plant. And in some cases, in some cities and in some places, that will be, a couple of hours. In the SAM system, it's several hours by the time it comes all the way from Montara down. And even in Half Moon Bay, some of your more southern areas take several hours for the water to get down there. One one of the problems is when it's moving slowly like that, the solids tend to settle out in the pipe. You always have a slime layer in a pipe because bacteria and nutrients are going in there. And there's
Excuse
turbulence.
me, Dan. Excuse me, could I ask everybody to mute themselves except you because there's a lot of interference? Everybody mute, please.
So turbulence in the system causes the chemicals that are in the odorous properties of the water to escape into the atmosphere, and that's when we get both odors and the corrosion that associated with that. So natural wastewater, you have a high nutrient content, you have very low dissolved oxygen in wastewater, and once that oxygen is gone, the bacteria naturally have the ability to look for other oxygen sources. They have to have oxygen. So the most common source of oxygen in wastewater is a compound known as sulfate. It's a sulfur compound, and the bacteria break the oxygen off of that sulfate and release sulfide ions. And from there, you get more chemical reactions that create hydrogen sulfide, which is the primary compound that we're worried about as far as both corrosion and odors. Hydrogen sulfide is commonly referred to as rotten egg gas. It smells very strong and it can actually be deadly in high enough concentration. So it's something that we need to take care of. And at the treatment plant, we also have our anaerobic digesters, which naturally produce hydrogen sulfide. They are a non-oxygen process, so you have that happen in those tanks that we're actually working on right now. So you've seen these pictures before, some of the treatment plant corrosion. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these again, but I just wanted to remind you that corrosion is an issue. We have corrosion both from the sewer gases and also from the salt water that we have, or the salt air that we deal with. But we're talking specifically about the sewer gases today. Also wanted to show you some that we've seen at the pump stations. On the left here, that tall brown cylinder, that is actually a rusted muffler on a standby generator. The one on the left is at the Portola pump station. On the right is the generator at the Montera pump station. And you can't see the muffler, but it's in even worse condition. And the black cylinder thing down at the bottom is actually a new muffler to be put on there. And they may have installed this by now. This picture was taken about 2.5, 3 months ago, but their plan is to replace that. And, they're being held up by luck and rust right now. This is a picture of the generator at Montera. On the right is the Princeton pump station. You can see the corrosion around the wet well there of the concrete in the building. I like this picture here on the left is the chemical feed system for odor and corrosion control at the Montera pump station. And as you can see, it's starting to rust away on its own. You also have some conduit at the Montera pump station that is corroding. A lot of that is also, as I pointed out earlier, from salt air, but a lot of it is from the hydrogen sulfide gases that are forming in the sewers. So hydrogen sulfide is your primary compound. You also have mercaptans, amines, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, scatols, some more organic sulfides and diamines. These are all just various compounds. Most of them are sulfur-based. The ammonia is not, and I believe it's that amines that are also based off of an ammonia. But I'm not a chemist, so I may have that one confused. But hydrogen sulfide, if we can take care of that, will greatly reduce the corrosion and a lot of the things that are associated with sulfide reduction. So what happened on that one? Oh, okay. So odorous compounds we have here. Again, the sulfides, organics, and the amines. H2S gas is the most predominant. And one thing you need to remember is it can be in the water and you don't smell it or have corrosion. But as soon as it goes to atmosphere, you smell it. And hydrogen sulfide, the big issue of it is when it mixes with water, it turns into sulfuric acid, and that's when you get the corrosion. So if you have hydrogen sulfide in a sewer system with water, you're going to end up with some corrosion. You also end up with the mercaptans, disulfides. They're all very odorous, and the amines with ammonia. Hey, I was right. They're proud of me. So in a sewer pipeline, you typically have water running down the pipe. It doesn't have a lot of oxygen in it. You start getting a breakdown of the chemical because it's consuming the sulfate to be able to get the oxygen. The hydrogen sulfide goes into atmosphere. You get a little bit of water with it, and you get on that upper right-hand corner, you end up with the sulfuric acid, which starts corroding your pipes and anything else that comes in contact with. And this picture here, basically the same thing, but on the right side, right above the water level there, the little wavy line, it says acidic condensate. This is typically where you get one of the two places you get your worst corrosion is right along the edge of the pipe or at the very top in the crown of the pipe. Those two areas tend to be the most common areas. And again, it's because the bacteria do not have adequate oxygen to be able to live, so they look for another oxygen source, which is typically sulfate. I wanted to show this pipe. This is a section of your force main from the Montera force main. You can see in the top picture, there's some little holes in the top. Those holes correspond with the bottom picture. This pipe is actually turned upside down from what they actually found it. The corrosion was on the bottom of the pipe. And what they determined, Winsler and Kelly Engineering in a report in 2009, determined that more than likely this was due to what they called deposition corrosion, that the deposits in the bottom did not have oxygen in them, so the bacteria living down in that bottom started eating them or started creating hydrogen sulfide, and you ended up with sulfuric acid in the bottom of your pipe. In this bottom picture, you can see there's kind of a granular type of material in the bottom. That material actually used to be between the two rows of, before it was turned upside down, it was between those two rows of holes that you can see in that bottom pipe. So right along that water line is where they believe they were seeing a lot of the corrosion from the hydrogen sulfide. So for treatment,
Question, how did it get turned upside down? What do you mean by turned upside down?
they actually removed this piece of pipe to inspect it, to see what was going on. They had leaks, so they pulled it out and removed it. And when they found the holes there, it's kind of abnormal to have holes on the bottom of the pipe. It obviously happens. Usually it's the top of the pipe. So they wanted to try and figure out why those holes were at the bottom. So in these pictures, they just twisted it 180 degrees so that we could see the holes rather than have.
Barbara, you can see the pictures are in the pipes are in the parking lot at Sam.
Yeah, these pipes.
When they were working on that, I asked them to bring them back so people could see the condition of the pipes instead of just discarding them.
Ah, okay, thank you. So that was they just turned them for the picture.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Normally what we found is this was, when it was in the ground, it was 180 degrees from what it is here.
So would that mean it was leaking sewage into the ground?
Yes, it was. That's why they dug it up initially, is when they had the leak.
But they have repaired that. They determined
it was back in 2009.
Okay.
Yeah, so this,
Kind of.
10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's why we're doing inspections of all the pipe sections again now. You just got a report on the Princeton pump station a couple of months ago where they went in and did this high-tech electronic scan and tried to identify any weak spots, which that pipe turned out to be in pretty good condition, which was great news. So from a treatment standpoint, there's typically two types. One is a liquid phase, the other one is atmospheric. We're not going to talk about atmospheric tonight because that literally is an odor-only thing. It does not help corrosion, and it's very point source specific. If you have odors at a pump station, you might put in, well, matter of fact, at the Portola pump station, we have a biofilter that's there. But there's different types of atmospheric treatment, but we won't get into that tonight because the real project we're looking at right now in the capital improvement program is liquid phase. Today, SAM for the last at least longer than 10 years, probably 20 years, has been feeding liquid chlorine into the system to try and control odors and corrosion. We'll get into why that's probably not the best solution, and we're looking at alternatives right now. But I'll go through that and we'll talk about them. But first thing we got are what are called precipitation method, and typically you use either ferrous or ferric iron salts, ferrous chloride, ferrous sulfate, ferric chloride, or ferric sulfate. What these do is they react with the hydrogen sulfide and they literally bind it together, and you get a iron and ferrous or iron and ferric particle that settles out. And one of the disadvantages of this stuff is that it does tend to settle out, and you get more solids in your system that are not, you can't break them down. They need to be removed as a solid once they get to the treatment plant. It works well. It's a quick reaction. They're really good for a short detention time, up to about 3 hours. And as long as you don't need to get below a half a part per million of hydrogen sulfide, it's pretty good stuff. It is a hazardous chemical as far as CERCLA is concerned. And CERCLA is a law that was passed in 1981 that established hazardous material specifications on a federal basis. So most of what we're going to talk about here are considered hazardous materials, but there are a couple that aren't. And like I said, it produces solids. And it ties solids up.
Question, does that mean hazardous to human beings or hazardous to the environment? Or it sounds as if they're in the pipes and fairly contained. So how hazardous would they be?
Well, it's not so much even in the pipes, this stuff is made, they literally take hydrochloric acid and dissolve iron into it. One of the ways they do it is they recycle wrecked cars, and they dissolve wrecked cars to get the iron content into the product. One of the other disadvantages of this is when they mix it all together, it actually does put acid back into the pipe, but it's very dilute, so it doesn't really hurt anything that way. But when I say hazardous material, it's the biggest concern, honestly, Barbara, is from a storage standpoint and a pipe standpoint, that if it should happen to spill, you do have a material out there that from a human contact or an environmental contact, either one can cause damage.
But it stays in the pipes.
As long as it stays in the pipe, we're good. In the tanks or the pipes, we're good. It's not a problem.
But if there's a spill or a broken pipe, then we've got an issue, and the cleanup and the regulatory agency reaction is something we've got to pay attention to.
Yeah, I've used iron salts in places. They invariably, anywhere they're used in the immediate area, the whole place looks like rust, because you end up with little spills here and there, and you end up with the mess of the rust. The tanks have to be double-walled, double containment tanks, so that if the inside tank happens to spring a leak, you are containing it in time. Piping has to be double-walled piping for the same reasons. So as we go through this, you're going to see several of these kind of chemicals, and I am not recommending that we use iron salts. I just want you to be aware of stuff that we're looking at. And so oxidizers are exactly what they sound like. They are something that literally destroys the compounds, the odor compounds, by oxidizing them. You're looking at peroxide, hydrogen peroxide, potassium permanganate, chlorine gas, sodium hypochlorite bleach. Same process as disinfecting. There are some others, chlorine dioxide and chlorite and ozone are also common oxidizers, generally used more in the industrial world, but sometimes they are used in the municipal applications as well. In the last 5 years or so, the chlorite has become a more popular one. But again, every one of these is a hazardous material when it comes to handling them. And generally speaking, their big disadvantage for most of them is that they only treat very short detention times. They're really good if you want to get rid of an odor at a pump station that happens to just have that odor at the pump station and nowhere else. Something like that, you can put some in the wet well and they'll get rid of it quickly. Hydrogen peroxide does have oxygen in it, so it does tend to go a little bit further, but even you typically have to put multiple injection points on your force main or on your pipe to be able to control the sulfides. Potassium permanganate is very similar in a lot of ways to the iron salts we were just talking about. It's very messy. It turns everything purple instead of orange, but it again is a strong oxidizer. So anything that comes in contact with it, it's going to burn it. And hydrogen peroxide, one of my favorite experiences when I was working for the city of San Diego, we actually used 70% hydrogen peroxide at the facility there. And a semi truck that was delivering it got lost and stopped and parked in a grocery store parking lot to go in as before cell phones, went in to use the phone, the pay phone, turned around and walked back out of the building, and the parking lot was on fire because his truck was dripping just a very small amount of this out the back of the truck and ended up burning that truck to the ground. The tires caught on fire, and it's hydrogen peroxide's nasty stuff. That's great in low concentrations for cleaning up wounds and things, but not in those high concentrations. I think chlorine gas, I think we all know it's going to disinfect. It's going to do what chlorine gas does, but again, very dangerous from a standpoint of storage and being able to feed it. It does require a mixing system on top of everything else, as well as having an emergency scrubbing device. So if you happen to have a leak in a tank, you can scrub that and neutralize the gas. Sodium hypochlorite is Clorox bleach at 2.5 times its normal strength. Bleach is typically 3 to 5% that we buy in the stores. This is 12.5%. Again, requires double containment. It's dangerous to use. If workers get it on them, it burns them, but it will destroy the odors. One of the advantages, like I said, it's very quick reacting. One of the disadvantages is part of whatever you dose is going to react with other compounds. It's a disinfectant. It's an oxidizing disinfectant. So there's a lot of bacteria in sewage, so it reacts with anything, whether it's an odorous compound or a non-odorous compound, it's going to react with it. It's hard to maintain the downstream residuals. Like I said, short detention times or point source, but it is economical in short detention times. I already talked about the hazard and the difficulty in handling it, but oxidizers will remove in the right situations. It'll do it and do it well. The third one that's used commonly are what's called pH shifters, caustic soda, mag hydroxide, and calcium hydroxide, which is lime. The idea here is to get the pH high enough that it binds the sulfides into the solution. So you need to run a pH of over 9.8 to have 100% solution, which that high of a pH causes problems at the treatment plant. This is used in places, but generally pH shifters are good at controlling the odor in one place if you don't mind having it somewhere else. So what happens is you'll typically dose it somewhere, and then as the water goes down the line and another line comes in or it gets to the treatment plant where it gets diluted, then all of a sudden the sulfides get released. I'm not a fan of pH shifters at all, but they have been used in many places. Caustic soda, inexpensive. It's another hazardous material. It's very aggressive and hazardous. I've seen it eat concrete floors. It can be pretty nasty stuff, but if you use it right, you can get that pH up over 9 and you're keep the solution or the sulfides in solution. Magnesium hydroxide is still classified as a hazardous material, but it's relatively safe. It's not super aggressive, but it also has a hard time getting the pH high enough to bind everything, getting over that 9.0 number or 9.8. 8.3 is pretty easy to work with, and it'll get probably about 70% of it to stay in solution at that, but it's, you're not getting everything there. So it's another, and the other thing about it is that you got to have special mixing and feeding equipment on site to deal with it. So in essence, basically these pH shifters keep the hydrogen sulfide in the liquid stream, move it down to where it gets diluted or goes to the headworks. If it happens to get through the treatment plant, once it reaches the secondary clarifier or the secondary, the aeration basin, the secondary treatment system, the aeration basin, when you start blowing air through it, it's going to strip all that sulfide out and you will have odors there. So one of the real disadvantages of it is if you have relatively low levels of hydrogen sulfide, your costs are the same as if you have high, because you're shifting the pH of 100% of your flow to be able to contain it. And it doesn't care whether it's got 1 part per million or 40 parts per million, it's costs the same to change that pH. So it's a disadvantage there. The last one is providing alternate oxygen supplies. And this is the one that I favor and that we're really looking at right now. As you may recall when we talked earlier, the sulfides and the hydrogen sulfide are formed because bacteria run out of oxygen. In the typical wastewater stream, the source of oxygen they can go after is sulfate, which releases those sulfide ions, and you end up with hydrogen sulfide. You can inject air for short-term systems. You can just literally an air compressor and pump air into your pipeline. It works for short-term, but you can't get typically enough air in. There's not enough oxygen with it. Some really big places will use liquid oxygen in the same type of a thing. Problem with the liquid oxygen is it's very expensive to buy, and you're dealing with a fire hazard there. But the most common one these days, and it's been very common since the early 90s, is called nitrate, both sodium and calcium nitrate. And nitrate is a nitrogen with 3 oxygens attached to it. And luckily, bacteria in the wastewater prefer nitrate over sulfate. So if there's nitrate in the water, they will get their oxygen from the nitrate. Like I said, it's typically calcium nitrate or sodium nitrate. Calcium is sold under a trade name of bioxide, and it has about 3.5 pounds of oxygen per gallon of material. Sodium nitrate is a more commercially available product, but it only has about 2 pounds of oxygen per gallon. So it's almost half as concentrated. So you're dealing with a lot more material. Both of them are very safe. They are not considered hazardous materials. They're not, if you get them on you, it's uncomfortable. It's like having really, really salty water on you. They are hydroscopic, which means they will suck water out of almost anything. So if you spill them on the ground, they don't get dry very fast. As a matter of fact, in your climate, they probably would never dry because they will suck the moisture out of the air. But the nice thing about them is not only do they remove sulfides, they will actually prevent sulfides because they provide that oxygen source. So they work well that way. These 2 slides, a little bit complicated, but the main thing, this is the prevention using nitrate. Right in the middle of the page, there's a formula that starts with 8 NO3, so 8 nitrates. This is showing that to prevent the sulfides, you have to have a penetration of the nitrate into that slime layer. And if it's in there, then you will prevent that. It takes a little bit more, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it. It can get expensive. It's usually better to remove it, because if you're removing it, you have some still in the slime layer like shown here. But if you go up right under where it says wastewater, the second line down, you also have that same nitrate in the water. So you're both preventing in the slime layer, and anything that's already been formed is removed in the water layer, and you get a double bang for your dollar by removing and preventing at the same time. So like I say, it's only disadvantage is it is not quick reacting. If you need to put it in someplace and get rid of odors immediately at that site, it's not the right chemical. You either need to feed it upstream, or not be or find something else, because it takes approximately an hour and a half of detention time minimum for it to be able to get the bacterial cultures going the way it wants to. It's a natural process, treats a wide range of the sulfide products or components that we talked about earlier. You maintain a slight residual coming into your treatment plant, so you know that you've got it treated. You don't want too much of it though, because remember, bacteria like that nitrate, and when they pull the oxygen off, it releases nitrogen gas. So there have been plants that have overdosed, and when it hits their primary clarifiers, the nitrogen breaks off because the bacteria and the sludge are still consuming it, and then the nitrogen attaches to the solids and floats the solids back up to the top in their primary clarifiers. So that can create problems, but it's a very, very easy chemical to use. It's very clean. It's something that is readily available. And recently we have been working with a vendor that deals with this stuff. Unfortunately, due to the COVID situation, they've been a little stretched thin and having a hard time getting out, but they are actually scheduled to come out and do some testing of the system to see how strong our sulfide concentrations really are, how much hydrogen sulfide is actually in the water, so we can get a proposal from them on a cost treatment. We did have some estimates done last fall and last spring based on stoichiometric calculations. It looks like based on those that the cost is going to be equal to or less than what the chlorine is costing today, with better results. So we think it'll be a great way to go. I'm not going to repeat all this. We've already talked about it. One thing, I don't know if it's been reported to you, but right now you are storing chlorine. On the left is at Montera. On the right is down at Princeton. Both of those are double wall tanks, and both of those tanks, the inside tanks have developed a leak. So we're holding this chlorine solution right now with a single wall exterior tank. So these tanks need to be replaced. And one of the things that the company we're talking to does, they will provide turnkey. They will come in with their double wall tanks. We don't need an orange one unless you really, really want one. It is Half Moon Bay color. Maybe it would work good for the cougars. But they come in with provide tanks, or we can buy them, whichever one makes the most sense for Sam. And that's one thing we've asked for a proposal, is to look at what they call a full service, where they provide all the equipment and operate it, maintain it, and charge you a price per gallon, versus if we buy all the equipment at Sam, maintain it, operate it ourselves, and just buy the chemical from them, how much difference is price in those two chemicals, so that we can determine the best financial decision for Sam going forward. They have very simple feed systems, or they have some very complicated ones. In Sam's case, I believe the simple timer-based ones will work fine for you, save you a lot of money, and they're UL listed, so we got a good safe feeding mechanism. So right now, that's what we got. I would like to make sure I point out that Lamb Technical Services, Ed Lamb and Brown and Caldwell, some of this information was taken from them, and then AH Water, Vince Morano, who did the reports for us earlier. I quoted them both in this presentation. I don't want to take credit for this work that's not mine. So any questions? Barbara, you're on mute.
Okay, I want to ask about this because it seemed like an important thing. So it sounds like the odor is, even though it's called odor control, it's really more about corrosion control.
I think honestly for Sam, that is true. I think that is true. You don't get a lot of odor complaints. You do have the biofilter that's at the Portola pump station, and occasionally it will get overwhelmed. I'm not personally a big fan of filters. Some people have had good luck with them, but they're very temperamental. They require that you feed them a very constant feed all the time. If you have a very constant feed all the time, and they work good, but your system's not that constant.
So you're essentially looking at adjusting the way we're treating pretty much everything that comes into SAM
from the north,
reduce the corrosion potential of the sludge, as it were.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Say it again. I want to make sure I understood you.
You're looking at treating, kind of tweaking the way we treat material coming into SAM to reduce the, well, throughout the whole system, to reduce the corrosion potential, to improve the way it arrives and goes through the process at the plant. Is that right?
That is 100% correct. Yes. So,
Well, it just seems like an important project, and I wasn't clear like why a lot of attention was being paid to odor control.
yeah, and I use the word odor and corrosion interchangeably because they really do go hand in hand. One of these presentations I looked at literally had 202 slides where they went into a lot of the detail, but you didn't want 202 slides, so I cut it way down. But the corrosion, they go hand in hand, and especially where you have force mains that go into gravity sewers. That is a very common place for a lot of corrosion to happen when your sewer gets down to the treatment plant and starts getting disturbed going through the processes, through the bar streams, that type of stuff. And I think that's why some of those plant pictures where we had with the motor, with the whole motor corroded away, it's right at the bar stream. But I think that is what definitely corrosion is your biggest concern today.
Okay. Thank you very much. I wanted to, because it seemed like this was something important. So you are going to shortly be proposing additional changes to deal with these issues.
I think we'll probably sometime in August. Fingers crossed if the vendor can make it happen, but they're telling me they can.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I have a question. Dan, you said that this treatment would have to happen for the north part of the SAM system. I guess SAM doesn't extend that far into Half Moon Bay given the engineering. So Half Moon Bay doesn't need to worry, and SAM doesn't need to worry about this. Is that
based on our investigations last fall and through the winter? And I need to qualify something. I mentioned earlier that temperature is one of the things that affects this. As the temperature gets warmer, you get more bacterial action, so you get more production. Luckily in Half Moon Bay along the coast, your water temperatures stay really pretty consistent. They only vary a couple of degrees some of the winter. If you go to a place like Phoenix or Las Vegas, their water temperatures can literally change 25 plus degrees between summer and winter, and they get huge amounts of those. Well, those two are the largest calcium nitrate users in the world. To keep their systems from stinking everybody away. But when we checked in Half Moon Bay, and we did look there, they have a couple of pump stations that are further out down at the golf course and stuff that are probably producing some sulfides, but it's being stripped out through the gravity system before it gets to SAM. And by the time that we got down to the Safeway grocery store, we were not finding any at all. So it was determined it didn't make sense for SAM to worry about the Half Moon Bay system at this point. Half Moon Bay may, in the future, want to look at installing a small system out at the golf course or something like that to protect their own system, but it's not affecting SAM.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any more questions? I don't see any hands up on the participants list, but if you have a question, jump in. Okay, seeing no questions or hearing nobody jumping in, let's move on to receive the status report from Amoresco on the development for energy efficiency projects.
Okay, good evening. Let me see if I can share my presentation here. Okay, that should be working. If it's not, please let me know. Good evening. My name's Warren Van Ryzen. I'm with Amoresco. It's been a few months since we've last talked with you all, but I'm happy to be back in front of you presenting an update on our energy project. I have with me Paul Douglas, who is a new member of our Amoresco team. Paul, if you don't mind, maybe you can give the group an introduction to yourself and say a few words, and then I'll continue on.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Douglas. I live right here in the Bay Area. I've been in the energy business for over 10 years. I live in the East Bay and got to sit down with Kishan the other day, and I'll be the account lead on this, and looking forward to meeting you all personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So a couple recent action items that were completed, mainly around design. We've completed approximately 30% design for all our mechanical and electrical scope. That gives us a solid foundation to solicit bids from local contractors for the work that we are looking to implement out at SAM. The second bullet point there regarding financing, we actually had to go out and find a new lender for SAM. We were successful with a 3.22% rate for up to a 20-year term. That was just a preliminary rate that we were given basically a couple months ago on the original terms of the project. So we'll be refreshing that. Usually we are pretty conservative on that rate, so I'm hoping that we can see a little bit of a reduction when it's time to present the final numbers. I also held contractor bid walk on June 18th. We unfortunately had some delays due to coronavirus. We were originally scheduled to be out there with our contractors on the 30th of March. Everything pretty much had to be postponed indefinitely. So the 18th was the first time I was able to get out and bring our contractors. These are the list of companies that attended. There were a few more that were invited, but they declined to come out. One of them was GSC Construction. But for pump and motor replacement, we have some of the familiar faces like Peninsula Pump, Pump Repair. RF McDonald was also interested. All the electrical components of this project, to include motors, motor control centers, VFDs, all the microturbine electrical. Calcon is submitting a bid on that. And then for the mechanical microturbine scope, we're working with Gevedin Industrial. So I'm expecting bids back this Friday. I will be repopulating my energy model with the updated numbers, as well as some new items I have included, as well as the up-to-date energy savings calculations. We'll go back and solicit a interest rate and term from our financier, tie up any T's and C's, any type of operating and maintenance expenses, repair and replacements on specified intervals. And then we'll be looking to come back to the board in August to present our final package. So that was pretty quick and sweet. There was some more detailed information in the packet that I provided to Kishan that he put in his staff report. But if there are any questions, please feel free to let me know.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the board?
Barbara.
Go ahead.
So is it costing us more because of our audit?
So as far as the final project cost or the cost for the study?
The financing costs for all of it.
Funding.
The funding. Is the funding going to be at a higher interest rate because of the 17-18 audit?
It seems to be comparable with the terms that we received before the auditors provided their opinion. So what happened was, when the auditors provided their opinion on the 17-18 financials, they gave a no opinion, and our first lender that we had dropped out. Our director of finance went out and looked for some other local funding companies to see if they would be interested in funding this project. We were able to gather Sam's 18-19 financials and provide that to our current lender. They reviewed that, were comfortable with everything that was in that, and then gave us a comparable source of funds.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good question. If I may, we don't make any profit or any money at all in the financing, and we'll do our utmost. Our Vice President of Finance will do our utmost, and all of us, to get the best we can for you.
I know, I just wondered if clearly it affected it if we got dropped by the previous lenders, but it sounds as if you've done a good job at finding us another source of funds. So that's very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this one's very comparable.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we provided the unaudited financials for 18-19 so that we can move forward with this project.
Yes.
So Ameresco will be coming back to the board in August with a proposal, and the idea was to get the actual costs, and therefore they sent out everything for bids and getting actual costs so that the cost will be completely known. It's not like an estimate cost, which will not be inflated later on, but it'll be a fixed cost and
right
arriving for the bid.
That's correct. So our intent is the next time we present our numbers, those will be firm fixed, not to exceed. Thanks.
Good.
That sounds good. I think you guys have been doing a good job. And,
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I think that Sam will benefit from having this kind of relationship. What is the anticipated timeline of this relationship?
So typically we stay with you for the term of the funding. So if we are in a 20-year term, then Ameresco would be a partner with Sam the entire time. So we
Absolutely.
offer measurement and verification services to prove that our savings estimates, that we're meeting or exceeding those, as well as service on items that are, not, for the microturbine, for example, those have some specific requirements and specialized technicians that need to service those. So we would also provide service through the manufacturer to make sure that the microturbine system would produce the electricity that we would guarantee, as well as not give Sam any headaches throughout the entire term of the loan.
Okay, and what is the anticipated lifespan of this equipment, and what happens when the loan is done?
So everything will be functioning at the end of this term. So, pumps and motors is something that, Sam has had this infrastructure out there for 30 plus years. Those items are the ones that we have identified for replacement and upgrade. And then the microturbine system, something that's a little outside of the wheelhouse. The manufacturer provides guaranteed service and overhaul services to make sure that the system will operate for whatever type of service contract we enter into with them. At the end of the term, all of this equipment and operations and everything gets turned over to Sam, and they own it at that point. We can continue to provide services, in 5-year terms to extend that, or we can help Sam to enter in an agreement with our current service provider to continue to offer those services.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, any more questions from the board? Hearing none, let's move on to the attorney's report.
Thank you so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good evening, board members. Just one administrative note. When we do go to closed session, we have a number of closed sessions tonight. I'm going to ask the chair's discretion to do the labor and employment related closed sessions first. That way we can let Christopher go. And then just one thing to note, and you've probably seen it on the news with COVID cases on the rise. We kind of all hoped that we'd be moving past COVID restrictions right now, but that's not the case. So a lot of closures that don't necessarily affect Sam and the Half Moon Bay area very much, because you guys have had a more restrictive Bay Area health order to begin with. But statewide, there's 30 counties, not including, interestingly, San Mateo County, where there are now substantial restrictions on indoor activities, including non-essential business, offices, and big hit on the kinds of businesses that are typically associated with retail. But just wanted to bring it to your attention. Right now, you guys are, for Sam's already an essential business, right, or an essential function, and you already have in place procedures for addressing employee issues. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like our current situation is going away anytime soon. So I think with that, that's my report, and I'll look forward to further discussions in closed session.
Thank you. Do we have any directors' reports? Hearing none. Let's move on. Topics for future board consideration. Please add the discussion on the SAM collections contracts with sort of a brief history and where we're going, so that the board is fully informed while we're making these decisions.
When are you envisioning doing that?
I was thinking, hopefully, that we'd have some time in August.
Okay, okay. I'll work with Keishan on that.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be a huge, long, involved discussion, but things have been changing over the years. There's been discussions on who's employed to do what, and whether we have a single contract or 3 different contracts. And I think just a brief history is always very useful for a full understanding when we're going to be making decisions. It puts us all on the same page to begin with, instead of our vague recollections from way back when. So I would appreciate that. Let's move into closed session. So everyone who doesn't need to be on can sign off. It's 8:10.